Think buying a presale in Vancouver is a safe bet. One wrong move and you could lose hundreds of thousands. Or worse, end up in court. Imagine this. You've just put down a $100,000 deposit on your dream condo. 2 years later, the market dips and the bank won't give you the mortgage you need. And now your unit is worth less than what you agreed to pay. Can you walk away, or are you about to lose your deposit? And maybe even get sued for hundreds of thousands. Today, we're breaking down exactly when you can and can't back out of a purchase agreement in Vancouver, the risks buyers face, the options developers have, and the strategies to protect yourself from financial disaster. Stick with me to the end and you'll learn how to avoid becoming one of those horror stories. My name is Shahrad Sardari, a local Vancouver realtor who's helped numerous presale buyers not only avoid financial disaster, but also get a good deal by providing all the information needed to make informed, safe, and smarter decisions to avoid surprises. Let's jump right in. Let's define what a deposit is. When you buy a presale, you're not paying the full price upfront. Instead, you put down a deposit, usually somewhere between 5 to 20% of the purchase price. That money doesn't go straight to the developer, it's held with a lawyer or notary until the building is finished. And then it gets applied to your down payment when the building is done. But here's what matters. That deposit is the main thing on the line. If you back out or can't close, that's the money you stand to lose. And depending on the project, we're talking tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, let's see when you can and can't back out and what you're risking at each stage. Starting from the moment you sign a presale contract in Vancouver, you automatically get something called the 7-day rescission right. This comes from a provincial law called the Real Estate Development Marketing Act, or REDMA. Think of it like a cooling off period. For 7 calendar days after you sign, you can back out for any reason at all. Maybe you found another project you like better, maybe you got cold feet, maybe you just changed your mind. No penalty, no explanation, and your deposit has to be refunded in full. Here's the thing. Most realtors and the developers themselves rarely emphasize this right. Why? Because they want the deal to go through. They'd rather you think that you're not able to back out. But if you know about it, this can be a very smart tool. Let's say there's a limited time incentive, maybe a free parking stall or a big discount, and you don't want to lose the unit. You can tie it down by writing the contract, then use the 7 days to shop the market and run comparisons, and make sure nothing better is out there. And if you find a better deal, you can walk away, no harm done. Now, what's the risk if you back out here? Well, it's pretty much nothing. The only thing to keep in mind is that while you're in those 7 days, you can't also tie up another unit somewhere else. But beyond that, you've got a no strings attached safety net. And here's a protection tip. Use those 7 days strategically. Don't think of it as just a week to sit around and decide. Think of it as a free option. You've locked in the unit, but you're still free to change your mind if something better comes along. If you're working with the right realtor, not only will they show you all the other options that could be good for you, but they will also use your contract as a bargaining tool against other developers to get you the better discounts and incentives at those other projects. A recent example is one of my clients who signed a contract on a wood frame low-rise project in Burquitlam. The developer was giving us a $10,000 discount and the total deposit was 10%. Because my client already had a signed contract, it showed other developers that they were serious buyers, they had the money, and they were committed to make a purchase. We used that to our advantage with another developer who was selling units in a concrete high-rise, which generally holds value better than a wood frame building. We got them into a unit on a higher floor with better views. On top of that, the developer wanted a 15% deposit, but we managed to negotiate it down to just 5% and secured an $18,000 discount. So not only did they upgrade to a stronger project in a concrete tower, they paid less, put down a smaller deposit, and ended up with a much better unit. All because we leveraged that 7-day rescission period the right way. Before we move past that rescission period, there's another tool you need to understand: assignment rights. An assignment is when you sell your presale contract to another buyer before the project completes. Think of it like transferring your concert ticket to someone else, except here, it's for a condo. On the surface, it sounds like the perfect solution if you need out. Can't close? No problem, just assign it to someone else. But here's the reality. Assignments are full of fine print. Some developers don't allow it at all, and others charge hefty fees. And that fee could be a few $1,000s flat, or it could be 3 to 5% of the purchase price. On an $800,000 condo, that could mean $40,000 just in assignment fees. And remember, even if your contract allows assignments, you still need to find another buyer. And if the market is cool, that's not always easy. Plus, many contracts say the developer has the right to approve new buyers, and that gives them control over the entire process, and they can take weeks to sign off on. So what's the upside? If assignments are allowed, it can be a lifesaver. You can get out of the contract, and you avoid losing your deposit. And sometimes you even make a profit if prices have gone up. But the downsides are clear too: high fees, strict approval processes, and the risk that nobody wants to take the unit off your hands. That's why assignment rights are something you should always ask about upfront. Once that 7-day period is over, the game changes completely. At that point, your contract is binding. Walking away almost always means losing your deposit. And deposits aren't small. They're typically 5 to 20% of the purchase price, often split into a series of payments over time. On an $800,000 condo, that means anywhere from $40,000 to $160,000. But here's the part many people don't realize: losing your deposit might not be the end of it. Developers can also sue you for damages if they have to resell your unit for less than you agreed to pay. Let's say you bought a presale at $800,000. 2 years later, the market cools and the developer resells the same unit for $750,000. They're not just going to pocket your deposit and move on, they can also come after you for the $50,000 difference. On top of that, they might claim carrying costs, marketing expenses, or legal fees. Now, what's the risk at this stage? At this point, you're talking about some serious money. You could be looking at six-figure losses, a lawsuit, and even a long-term damage to your credit if a judgment is registered against you. And then there's the sunset clause. This is a clause that sets a final deadline for when the building has to be completed. If the developer doesn't finish by the date, you may have the right to cancel and get your deposit back. You will find this clause in almost every pre-sale contract. Sometimes they give the developer the right to cancel too, which can create its own risks, but for buyers, a sunset clause is one of the only ways to get out of a contract years down the road if things drag on too long. Now let's talk about the stage that scares buyers the most, right before completion. And let's stick with the same example we've been using. You bought a presale for $800,000. 3 years later, the project is done, but the market is cooled. The appraiser comes in and says that the unit is only worth $750,000 today. Here's why that's a problem. Banks only lend based on today's appraisal value and not on the price you agreed to pay years ago. So even though your contract says $800,000, the bank will only lend on $750,000. That leaves a $50,000 gap you need to cover in cash. If you can't come up with it, you can't close. And if you can't close, you lose your deposit. And the developer can still sue you for damages. So what are the risks here? At this stage, you're risking your entire deposit, the possibility of legal action, and in the worst case, a financial mess that can take years to recover from. Here's the protection tip. Work with a realtor and a mortgage broker who both understand pre-sales really well. These contracts run for years. Interest rates, mortgage rules, and even your own financial situation can change dramatically in that time. Having the right team around you early on can make all the difference when closing day finally arrives. Now let's dig into some of the fine print that can make or break your experience. Disclosure updates. Developers are legally required under REDMA to update buyers if there's a material change. That could mean shrinking a floor plan, removing amenities, or changing parking availability. If they fail to disclose those changes properly, buyers may regain rescission rights even after the initial 7-day period. Force majeure. This sounds like legal jargon, but they basically mean extreme, unexpected events. A force majeure clause could cover things like government zoning changes, major lawsuits, or something outside the developer's control. If one of these events makes it impossible to complete the project, sometimes it gives either side the ability to walk away. For buyers, this is rare, but it can be a hidden exit route in extreme situations. Completion delays. Almost every presale contract gives the developer the right to extend timelines. If construction takes longer than expected, they can push completion back. The contract will usually spell out how much extra time they're allowed. Unless they exceed that maximum, you usually can't pull out just because it's delayed. For some buyers, this could mean waiting an extra year or more without any say in the matter. Now, this is a really important point that doesn't get talked about enough. When you buy makes a huge difference. Buying before construction starts, this is when you're buying from a glossy brochure and some renderings. You might wait 3, 4, even 5 years before the building is ready. And that's a long time for things to change. The real estate market could swing, interest rates could rise, your job, your income, or your family situation might look completely different by the time you're asked to complete. The advantage is prices at this stage are often lower, and developers sometimes offer the best incentives early on to get sales going. You might score a free parking stall, storage, or even a small discount, but make no mistake, the risks here are the highest because of the long timelines and all the unknowns. Buying after the construction starts sometimes is a smarter move because at this point, you have much more certainty. You can sometimes walk through the unit or at least see the building coming together. The timeline to completion might only be a few months instead of years, and that means less exposure to market swings and fewer unknowns. The trade off is that prices are usually higher. Developers don't need to offer as many incentives once the building is already well underway, and by then, the market has often moved. So the takeaway here is simple. The earlier you buy, the more risk you're taking on. Pre-sales aren't a quick flip, they're a long-term commitment, and if you're buying pre-sale, you need to be ready to hold for years and ride out whatever the market throws at you. When you compare buyers and developers side by side, it's pretty clear who's holding most of the cards. As a buyer, you get the 7-day rescission period. You might get rescission again if the developer doesn't disclose changes properly, and you might have assignment rights or a sunset clause written into the contract. But the developer gets to keep your deposit if you default. They can sue you for damages if they have to sell your unit for less, and they almost always have the power to extend timelines for completion within the limits of the contract. And here's the reality check. Yes, some disputes get settled privately, but don't expect leniency and always assume the developer is going to enforce every line of that contract exactly as it's written. Here's a quick pre-sale protection checklist you can actually use. Check the assignment rights and make sure you're allowed to resell your contract if you need to. Understand the fees and how much it would cost you to assign if things change. Look for sunset clauses. And most importantly, hire a realtor who specializes in pre-sales and has a strong relationship with developers. The right agent can sometimes negotiate better terms, spot red flags, and even get access to units and incentives that the general public won't see. And finally, think long term. Pre-sales only make sense if you're comfortable holding for at least 5 years. So can a buyer back out of a purchase agreement in Vancouver? Yes, but only in very limited situations. The first 7 days are your safety net. After that, it gets expensive fast. And then right before closing, you're essentially locked in. If you're thinking about buying pre-sale, make sure you're getting the right advice at the right time.